don't fight the populist, but try to understand why are people listening to the populists? Why are people unhappy? Augsti godātais Tajānī kungs, prezidents Junker kungs, cienījamās deputātes, godājamie deputāti, dāmas un kungi, draugi. Man ir patiesi milzīgs prieks šodien jūs uzrunāt par tik nozīmīgu tēmu par Eiropas nākotni. Kā jūs zinat, es gandrīz 10 gadus esmu strādājis šajā parlamentā kā parlamentārietis, un es šajā laikā arī varbūt pagūvu iemācīties. Die eine Sache, was ich gelernt habe, ist, dass wenn man hier eine Rede geben möchte, man muss mindestens auf 3 Sprachen sich ausdrücken können. Sonst geht's ja nicht. Also jetzt ist die zweite Sprache. Avec le français, c'est trop difficile pour moi, malheureusement. Je comprends les langues, mais pour un discours, c'est un petit peu trop difficile. But I'll continue in English. Oh, this is language 4. It's a change. The end of the term, the coming of the elections, it really is a time for reflection. But before we look forward, I want to go a little bit back in history to give a little bit of context. So, Latvia, Europe. What binds Europeans? Really, when you think about it, it is the shared history coming from ancient Greece and Rome through Christianity that spread throughout Europe. And as Christianity and this culture had spread throughout Europe, the last remaining outpost were the Baltics that still had not become part, shall we say, of this common shared cultural and religious heritage. It was only in the turn of the 12th and 13th century that the Pope in Rome said okay to a crusade against the non-Christians in the Baltics. Since that time, our country went through all of the cultural development changes, upheavals that the rest of Europe went through. Whether it's the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment. Today, our country is predominantly, at least historically, a Lutheran country, strong Catholicism in the southeast. We view ourselves, and through our history, we're part of the Northern European cultural area. It's very clear. We view ourselves as being rather pragmatic, very patient. We'd like to think rational and law-abiding as well. And in the culture, there's a strong creativity and personal enterprise that always presses its way through. Now, for hundreds of years after the introduction of Christianity, our country faced various political and military overrule, coming at times from Germany, at times from Poland, at times from Sweden, and at times from Russia. Throughout this time, of course, we maintained our identity, our language, and culture. And it was not until the end of the First World War in 1918 that we finally declared our own independence. And it took 2 more years for the War of Independence to free the country of the remaining German and the Russian armies, which were still there at the time. As a view into personal family history, my father's father, my grandfather, he entered the Tsarist army as a soldier for the Tsar. Then he became a Bolshevik soldier fighting the revolution against the Tsar. And then when his unit heard that our country had declared independence, he came home and became a freedom fighter for independence. A typical history at the time. Our country developed between the wars, then the Second World War came. It did a lot of damage throughout Europe. That's where I come into the picture. I am the son of refugees, wartime refugees. My parents, They were children in 1944. Mother was 8, father was 14. They fled in small boats from Latvia to Sweden. About 5,000 Latvians came to Sweden. About 200,000 fled to Germany as the advancing Soviet army was coming a second time, devastating the country. My parents grew up in Sweden, met and married. Then they emigrated further to the US, where I was born, together with my 2 sisters. I first came to Latvia in 1984. At the time, I was a high school student in the last refugee school, the Latvian refugee high school that was in Münster in Germany. That's when I first came to Latvia. It was a different world, a different country. Everything was gray. People didn't smile on the streets. Soviet soldiers on leave, but everywhere, everything was in Russian. You could see a visible lack of investment in any kind of infrastructure, whether they were buildings or roads or bridges. You could see decay. As solidarity came in the late 1980s in Poland, and the Berlin Wall fell in the end of 1989, change happened in our country as well. We finally regained independence in 1991. And in a very short amount of time, we developed democratic institutions, we developed free enterprise, we developed a banking system, we developed a market economy basically from scratch. And in 2004, it was only 13 years after regaining independence, we joined the EU and NATO. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to celebrate 15 years since we joined the European Union. And I can say, on behalf of my country, we have not regretted a single day since we joined the EU. So what is the EU? Well, first of all, and it must be stressed, it is a union of values: freedom, democracy, the rule of law. Historically in Europe, how were disputes settled? With soldiers, with guns, with rifles, with tanks, with destruction. How do we do it today? Tiresome debate, discussion, votes, but it's a heck of a lot better than the way it was done before. The EU is also about economic development, and at the core of that is the single market. By opening up our borders to one another, we have created one of the largest markets in the world, over 500 million people in sheer economic size, roughly equivalent to the United States, which is considered the world's most strongest economy. But all is really not well in the EU. All of us know as politicians that there's a lot of anti-EU sentiment going around. There are politicians who are offering very simplistic answers to very complex issues. Generally, they're referred to as populists. My simple message is, don't fight the populist. It's a worthless endeavor. But try to understand, why are people listening to the populists? Why are people unhappy? So why are people unhappy? What happened? Go back 10 years, 2008, 2009. A bank collapsed in the US. Okay, they collapse every once in a while. That led into a chain reaction of a banking crisis around the world, especially in Europe. That led to an economic crisis, the biggest since the Great Depression. My own country's GDP fell by almost 1/4, one of the steepest drops in about a year and a half. Other countries fell as well, maybe not so badly. And as we're coming out of the economic crisis, what happened a few years ago? The migration crisis. The unrest in the Middle East that started as peaceful revolutions that turned into bloody revolutions, and then refugees, migrants. The result of all of that is what I would call a political crisis. People losing faith in the system. It's understandable that they've lost faith. We have to help them regain it. So if you look at voters, what are their main concerns? I say there are 4. Jobs, the way of life, translated into immigration, the environment, and safety and security. To talk about the future of Europe, you need to address all these 4 issues. So what about jobs? The EU has a mechanism to foster job growth, and it is that which is simply referred to as the single market. I think of a story I remember as a child. I think it may have been one of Aesop's fables, where a father has 3 sons, and he gives a stick to one of his sons and says, break this stick, and the son breaks the stick. And then he gives another stick to the son, he breaks the stick, and the son breaks the stick. And he says, well, what's the difficulty? Then he gives the son a whole bundle of sticks together. And he says, now break the stick. And he tries, he can't. Gives it to a brother, can't. Third brother, can't. The simple moral of the story is, when you're alone, you can be broken easily, like a stick, like a twig. When you're united, you're powerful. And that is the beauty of the single market. Now, we have challenges to the single market coming from the outside. There's a rising China, and there's a US whose administration seems to be faltering a little bit in its belief that it has a leading and a major role to play in organizing world affairs and world trade. Now, what about China? A country that openly subsidizes its huge industries, and these industries are coming into Europe competing really on an unfair advantage. At the same time, European companies don't have equal access to Chinese markets. What's the answer? I say the answer to unfair competition is not protectionism. We cannot go the way of the Chinese. We should not become more like the Chinese, but demand that the Chinese become more like us in terms of opening up their market. We have a lot of clout as a union and as a single market. This is what we need to use, but not as individual sticks, but as that bundle that cannot be broken and can change things in the world. Inside the EU, we still have hurdles to overcome, and this has to do with the internal barriers still to the single market, both, especially I should say, in the digital sphere as well as in the services sphere. Ask yourself, why are the largest internet companies coming from the US? Why aren't they European? I think the answer is pretty obvious. The US has a dollar zone, it has a federal government and a federal budget, and it has 0 barriers between the states in terms of trade. They have a truly united single market, smaller than ours, 330 million. We have a larger one, but we have too many hurdles. So if we talk of wanting to have national champions, I don't think that we should bend our competition laws to artificially create national champions. I think we have to tear down the barriers within the single market to let those champions grow themselves, and they can take on the world, they can take on the US, and they can easily take on China. Now, one of the cornerstones of the single market is the financial system, the banks. 10 years ago, the biggest threat to the banks was liquidity. So we created a banking union to make sure that the ECB is overseeing the largest banks, to make it more safe that the banks will really be there tomorrow morning when we wake up. The world has changed since those 10 years. Liquidity is not the main problem. A new problem has emerged, which is terrorism in Europe and the financing of terrorism. And how does that often happen? Through illicit funds moving through the European banking system. So where are we on anti-money laundering? In this House, I was the co-rapporteur with Ms. Sargentini on the last 2 AML directives. I learned a thing or two about policy. AML is anti-money laundering legislation is all about risk assessment and reducing the risk of dirty money entering the system. To the east of Europe, we have a country, a big economy, Russia. And for years, for the past 20 years, money from Russia has been wanting to flee that country. Why? Because Europe is safe. Europe has the rule of law. Europe, no one takes your money away without going through the courts. You can't do that. That money wants to come to Europe. Some of it is clean, maybe most of it is clean, but some of it is not clean. And those who are working with unclean money, the criminals, I'm not talking about people looking to optimize their tax returns and itemizing, is this an expense or not? I'm talking about hardened criminals that are moving millions of euros. They're flying like hawks above the ground, and they're looking at the chain, the weak links in the chain. In this country, you can do that. In this country, you can do that. In this country, you can do that. Our country was also part of this chain. Not alone. Money laundering is a European problem. Now, since becoming Prime Minister, I don't have the patience to wait for all of us to get our act together. So I'm cleaning up my house. We're going to have the cleanest and the most resilient banking system in Europe. In 1.5 years' time, we'll gladly consult anyone in this room and in this house on how to clean up a banking system. But it's a little bit like fighting rats. I can make sure that I get the rats out of my house, and my house will be clean. But what about my neighbors? The criminals may have left Latvia for now, but they have, unfortunately, I'm convinced, not left Europe. So we have to clean the whole neighborhood. That means AML supervision, anti-money laundering supervision, has to be centralized jurisprudential supervision. Very strong and important step forward. So another concern about the voters, immigration, the way of life. There are no simple answers here. I don't have them. I don't think anyone does. The truth is, Europe is a fantastic destination to come, to live, to work. We have stable economies. We have stable democracies. We have the rule of law. We have individual freedom. And a lot of our neighbors do not. And as autocracy grows, the pressure on wanting to come into the EU will only increase. It will not go away. So we have to learn to deal with it. My country dealt with a little bit of immigration as well. During the 50 years of Soviet occupation, more than 700,000 people, migrants, arrived in our country. That's 1/3 of the population. We're only 2 million. 700,000 came in. Our government had no say over this because we had no government. It was Moscow making the decisions, fully making the decisions. No co-decision, no say. After regaining independence, how have we dealt with it? With the one big I word, integration. You have to work with the people, you have to work on your educational system, bring the people into our culture, bring the immigrants into your cultures. This is the way forward. We cannot fight that. You cannot stop people wanting to come into Europe. We are a preferred destination, but we have to work on integrating these people. But we can do something to mitigate the flows. And the obvious answer to that is the outer border, Frontex. This is a wonderful program, needs to be strengthened. Because if we can show our voters that we control the outer border, then we can have free inner borders. And we won't have the situation of a few years ago where within the Schengen zone, we remember going between Strasbourg and Germany, those of us who stayed in hotels there, that the bridge is sometimes closed or they're checking every car. This is not the way forward. We need open internal borders for our single market to work, which means we need firm borders on the outside. We will have to fund refugee camps. It's inevitable. We will have to fund development of economies and the rule of law in third countries. This is inevitable. And we have to work on integration. Europe is a union of 28 still sovereign countries with their own national identities. It's extremely important that we maintain our national identities, cultures, and languages. And we do this through the process of integration of people who have come in. The arrivals, they have to adapt to our countries because that's the way of the world. And this is what we need to work on. If we can show that we control the outer borders and we can integrate the arrivals, the voters will become much more relaxed about the entire issue. Third concern, environment. Climate change, I won't go into it deeply, it's real. Mankind, coal, oil, and gas burning is contributing. We need to stop this. So the legislation, the direction is absolutely correct. Reduce CO2 emissions, increase renewables, increase energy efficiency. All of this has to be done. But we have a difficulty, is that not all member states have the same kind of energy mix. My own country is just behind Sweden. We are almost at 40% of renewables. We're way ahead of the curve. But not everyone is ahead of the curve that way. Some countries are very coal dependent. And we cannot just wish fossil fuels away. Someone has to pay for the transition. So we need a little bit of time. Now, regardless of how quickly we want to move, there's one structural change that we need to make that change faster. And that is, again, I'm a single market kind of person, opening up the market in energy to competition. You have to have competition for renewables to advance. I'll just take one example, the electricity market. Many countries have regulated electricity prices. Consumers pay the same Monday morning, Monday evening, Monday night, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Sunday night, so no one is motivated to think about when to turn on the dishwasher or the clothes washer, or it doesn't matter, you pay the same all the time, so I'm not motivated to save. But in those markets where competition has been opened up, you have service providers that help you automatically regulate when you're buying electricity based upon the price signals. And in this way, we can reduce the overall needed capacity to supply the demand peak hours. Because during the peak hours, you will be motivated not to use, say, or have your refrigerator go warmer by 1 or 2 degrees. If you can do that for millions of households, the savings are enormous. But you have to have deregulated markets. If you want renewables, you have to have deregulated markets. Competition everywhere. And the fourth concern, safety and security. It means different things to different Europeans. I think in the south of Europe, when people think of safety and security, people are thinking about the threat of uncontrolled immigration, migration, terrorism. That's another threat that people feel. In the west of Europe, maybe the biggest threat right now is of an uncontrolled Brexit. Not only for trade, but also for peace in Northern Ireland. A very, very real concern. I come from Latvia, and it's no secret to anyone that when Latvians think of safety, we think of Russia. Russia is our eastern neighbor to all of Europe. Russia has a government that has one basic policy. It feels, and it is convinced, and it is in their policy papers, that they are surrounded by enemies, always under attack. That is their dogma. That is their belief. So the way that they fight back is to make their enemies weaker. Right now in Europe, the biggest threat from Russia is not military. It's a threat, but it's not the biggest threat. We have NATO, we have our own preparedness. The biggest threat is the threat of false and misleading and downright lying information. We live in the world of these wonderful devices that all of us have in our pockets or on our desks. I thought, as many of us did a few years ago, that this information is the age of having unlimited access to knowledge, to facts. You know, preparing a speech, you can go into the internet and find all kinds of crazy good things. But it also turns out that social media is a fantastic way to disseminate propaganda and downright lies instantaneously. And as more and more people move away from getting their news from the mass media, from educated journalists that have a certain ethic in checking their sources, as more and more people are getting the news from social media, we have to do one important thing, is to think seriously about legislating the responsibility of platforms, providers on the internet of the content that is being disseminated. It's a slippery slope, I admit, because it's a fine line between looking for responsibility and introducing a censorship. As a Latvian, I will never support censorship. Too much history there. But we have to find that fine line because this is an attack on our way of life. What are they looking to do? To divide society, to make us fight one another, to make us dislike one another. Think of the debate, vaccination. Where in the world does this argument come from that vaccination leads to autism? You can trace it back to the Russian outlets. They're disseminating this. They're making people not be vaccinated, and it's resulting in very serious health repercussions throughout Europe. Immigration, the immigration debate. Behind that, also, Russia. Brexit, very involved. We even have this bubble throughout all of the east of Europe of George Soros as some terrible person who's undermining our way of life somehow, we're being told. It all comes from one single source. And if we do not accept that fact, we cannot begin to address it. But I say for safety and security, militarily, my country invests 2% of its GDP into the military. We're a part of NATO. We think everyone should be doing this. But military is one part of the equation. The second part, equally important, is combating the dissemination of false and misleading information. And there we have to consider legislation. So, finally, I wouldn't be a Latvian politician if I didn't mention at least a couple things about the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, the 7-year budget that all of us are in the midst of trying to come to terms with. I completely agree, and as this Parliament does, that we need to invest in Europe more in research and development, into the clever young minds that are going to really create the jobs and the growth in value and in wealth in the future. This is extremely important. But it's equally important that as we're investing into the R&D, we don't just do it in 1, 2, or 5 select capitals, but it moves throughout Europe. Why? Clever minds are everywhere in Europe. Everywhere in Europe needs growth. If we think of excellence only concentrated in a few countries, we actually do ourselves a disservice. So yes, into R&D, but it really has to go around Europe. Very important. Clever cohesion. Cohesion is still important, but it has to be clever. We have to make sure that the poorer regions are converging upwards. A very important aspect of that. And last but not least of this, the farmers in Europe. We know that historically the European budget has been all about the cap. It was, years back. It's still important. But as a reminder, and we have a historic chance to right a historic injustice. All farmers in Europe compete in the same market. So if you sell grain, if you sell whatever, you sell it on the market. The price is what the market gives you. We subsidize, through direct payments, our farmers in Europe. But there's a catch. We don't subsidize our farmers equally, or even close to equally. And the 3 countries that are at the lowest end of the pile, well below the average, are the 3 Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, for obtuse mathematical reasons dating to the 1990s. Our farmers are competing with everyone else's farmers. The only way that they can compete is at the cost of their own well-being. They are forced to be poor to compete in the same market. So if we subsidize, and I'm open to not subsidizing anyone, but I don't think we'll get there in the next 7 years. If we subsidize, we should do it equally across the board for everyone. My speech comes to an end. You can breathe easier. Friends, the EU is not and never will be perfect. It's not. But it's the best damn thing that I can think of. In Europe, for hundreds, really thousands of years, differences were settled through the force of muscle. Who was stronger, persevered. Who was weaker, tough luck. No. The way that we work is by far better than anything that anyone has come up to date. Member states have joined of their own free will and with the consent of their citizens. Member states can leave the EU, but we see in Brexit, actually, none of us realized how difficult that would be. But as a testament to how Europe works, and also as a member of Council, I can say that the goodwill and the unanimous position, the sticking together of the remaining EU 27 is a testament that we can get through difficult times through discussion, through debate, sometimes very long debate, without resorting to any kind of violence. And this is the key to how the EU works, that we talk with one another, not fight one another. So what about the future? To sum up, I say we need to strengthen the basics, strengthen the single market, tear down the barriers, control our outer borders, bring down the threat of uncontrolled immigration, have a clever transition to clean energy, bringing in more market forces to play, and focus on our common security not only through the military, but also through the security of the information world that we live in. Don't fight the populists. Address the causes of people's malcontent. Left alone, we're like Aesop's sticks. We're just individual sticks, and we can be broken one by one. Even the large European countries are small in the world. But united, as that bundle of sticks, the European Union is a major force in the world, and we can bring our core values, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, to take bearing on other countries. Thank you very much.